In a culture where most people are more obsessed with looking like they are winning than actually winning, the Drake and Kendrick Lamar situation just took a turn that nobody in the mainstream press is willing to say out loud. And I am about to say it out loud tonight because somebody has to. What I am about to walk you through over the next few minutes is going to reorganize the way you have been reading this entire feud from your couch, from your phone, from your group chat, and from every corner of the internet you have been consuming this beef in for the last 18 months. Because two clips have surfaced in the last 72 hours, and when you place those two clips beside each other on a split screen in your mind, a pattern emerges that once you notice it, you will never be able to unnotice it again. And Kendrick Lamar sits directly in the center of that pattern whether he asked to be there or not. Before I take the next step, do me the small favor of tapping that like button, hitting subscribe if you happen to stumble in here as a stranger, and flipping notifications on. Because the next 12 minutes are going to move fast, and you do not want to be halfway through and realize you never locked the door behind you. Kendrick Lamar is at the heart of what we are unpacking tonight, and Kendrick Lamar deserves a viewer base that stays through the whole story, not just the highlight reel. And I promise you, on my grandmother's name, by the time we hit the final minute of this breakdown, you are going to see the Drake and Kendrick Lamar situation in a light that the mainstream commentary industry has quietly refused to switch on for the last calendar year, and once that light hits the room, there is no flipping it back off. Here is the setup nobody wants to lay out cleanly. A cluster of young streamers, running under a collective banner that has been eating engagement, scraps off the Drake and Kendrick Lamar feud for months, sat around a table somewhere in Los Angeles and decided that the next big content play on their calendar was to drive a caravan of vehicles up to a private residence they believed belonged to Kendrick Lamar himself. Not a concert lobby. Not a studio parking lot. Not a red carpet perimeter. Not a restaurant sidewalk. Not a fan meet and greet where a photograph is the reasonable ask. The address they picked was the address where a human being sleeps. The address where children eat cereal in the morning. The address where, on any normal Wednesday night, Kendrick Lamar is probably staring at a blank notepad or unwinding from being the most surgically analyzed rapper on the planet. And they looked at that address and said out loud, in a voice that survives on the recording, that this was the destination for tonight's shoot. The footage that came out of that stunt is a study in what happens when internet delusion meets a driveway camera. They arrive in a small convoy, phones already recording before the doors even swing open, because the entire point of the trip is the recording, not the encounter. Nobody in that group is bringing flowers. Nobody is bringing a letter. Nobody is bringing respect. Nobody is bringing a real message from a real person who actually knows Kendrick Lamar. They are bringing a script for a bit, and the bit requires Kendrick Lamar's front door as the set piece. The first streamer walks up to the intercom, presses whatever button is available, and announces on the mic that he has come to the property to deliver, quote, a message to Kendrick Lamar. The message, as he stages it, is that Kendrick Lamar allegedly caused Drake, and I want you to sit with the pettiness of this, some kind of emotional stress during the diss track season. And so tonight this crew has arrived to collect a symbolic debt on behalf of a millionaire artist who has never heard their names, never watched a full video from their channel, and would not recognize any of them in a police lineup. Pause on the architecture of that framing for a second, because it tells you more about the current parasocial economy than any think piece ever could. These individuals genuinely believe they are ambassadors. They genuinely believe that showing up unannounced at Kendrick Lamar's supposed residence and thumping on the door with a phone in the other hand is a legitimate act of retaliation in a rap beef they have zero actual stake in. They believe the microphone in their hand converts a trespass into a mission. And the microphone does no such thing. The microphone is not a badge. The microphone is not a warrant. The microphone is not a press pass. The microphone does not confer authority. The microphone only confers evidence. And the evidence is going to outlive every laugh recorded on that driveway. Then the temperature climbs. Because that is what happens when a group of camera-carrying strangers stand in a stranger's yard, all watching each other for permission to escalate. One of them starts hammering on the door. Another one hollers through the intercom in a voice engineered to travel. A third one performs the tired bit where he pretends to be a DoorDash driver, Then he pretends to be a package courier, and then he starts calling Kendrick Lamar by his government name over and over, drawing out every syllable like he is trying to summon him through the wood. They know silence is death on camera. They know the algorithm rewards volume and stakes and escalation. And so they manufacture volume and stakes and escalation on another human being's front porch, using somebody else's property as a personal soundstage. And then arrives the detail that turns the whole clip into a punchline and a warning at the same time. One of the streamers glances up, tilts his head, and points at a small surveillance camera nestled inside the branches of a tree at the edge of the property. A camera. In a tree. Read that back slowly. That single detail carries two possibilities, and each possibility is bad news for the crew standing in the driveway. Possibility 1. This is not actually Kendrick Lamar's residence, and they are currently harassing a completely unrelated homeowner who is about to have the worst night of their life for absolutely no reason connected to hip-hop, rap beef, or Kendrick Lamar personally. Possibility 2. This really is Kendrick Lamar's property, and Kendrick Lamar has clearly anticipated exactly this brand of stunt and hardened the perimeter accordingly. Either way, the tape is running. Either way, faces are logged. Either way, the legal implications of what is happening compound with every additional second of footage. Let me pause and be clean with you before I go further, because I am not the guy who is going to sell you speculation as verified truth. I cannot confirm on camera that this address is Kendrick Lamar's actual private residence. I am not sitting in front of a county records terminal. I am not a title clerk. What I can confirm without hesitation is that these streamers believed it was Kendrick Lamar's home. That belief is the entire foundation of the stunt. That belief is the product they were selling to their subscribers, to the algorithm, and to whichever corner of the timeline they were trying to impress. And in the parasocial economy, belief is the currency. Belief is the entire price tag. Whether the belief is factually correct or not is nearly beside the point, because the damage runs the moment the camera turns on and the location gets broadcast. Then the tape shifts gears in a way that everyone watching should sit with for a full breath. A vehicle rolls onto the property. A figure steps out of that vehicle, and according to a handful of viewers who have combed through the footage frame by frame, this individual appears to be aligned with Kendrick Lamar's private security operation. The energy in the group tightens instantly. All that door pounding, intercom shouting, government name calling bravado compresses into something you can physically watch shrink on screen. One young man mumbles into his own camera that he cannot run. Another one is visibly rattled. A third one starts walking backwards without turning around, which is the exact body language of a person who is calculating, in real time, that he may have grossly misread the room he just walked into. And I need to name something out loud because it applies whether the resident is Kendrick Lamar or any other human being on planet Earth. You do not roll up on somebody's private home in this country, in this cultural climate, with a phone in your hand and your face on the lens, and reasonably expect the interaction to end with hugs. That is not how the physics of American residential property work. There are people in this country who own firearms. There are people who employ security. There are people who have been through home invasions and never fully recovered from the sound of a doorknob turning at the wrong hour. You do not know who is on the other side of that door. You do not know what kind of week that person just survived. You do not know the medications they are on, the grief they are carrying, or the last threat they received. And when you gamble on that ignorance for a 2-minute clip, the odds do not favor you on a long enough timeline. Here is the moment in the tape that I had to rewind twice, because it says more about the psychology driving this entire operation than any other frame. One of the streamers, mid-standoff, floats an idea to the rest of the group. He suggests that when the door finally opens, they should tell whoever is on the other side that Aubrey sent them. Aubrey. That is Drake's government name, Aubrey Graham. These young men were fully prepared to invoke Drake's own legal name as the alleged sponsor of their late-night visit to Kendrick Lamar's alleged front door. Let me unpack why that line, more than any other single moment, is catastrophically stupid. If Drake did not send them, and I have zero evidence he did, they were about to speak on behalf of one of the most powerful artists on the planet without permission, and Drake's lawyers do not casually shrug off unauthorized representation. If Drake did send them, and again I have no evidence to support that reading, they were about to implicate Drake in what could easily be framed as harassment or trespass against Kendrick Lamar. Either way, the person who proposed that sentence should have kept it inside the group chat, because the moment he said it out loud on a live phone recording, the sentence became a permanent line item in a folder that lawyers open at billable hours. But the deeper poison inside that idea is not legal. It is psychological. Those individuals believe that dropping Drake's name transforms their stunt from a random late-night trespass into an official errand from headquarters run by loyal soldiers on sanctioned business. That is the delusion. That is the fantasy they are actively living inside. And delusion is not a passive state. Delusion is a motor. Delusion is an engine. Delusion is the transportation. Delusion moves people. Delusion produces footage. Delusion signs leases in neighborhoods it cannot afford. Delusion pushes crews into driveways they had no business turning into, and Kendrick Lamar has now been forced to sit in the middle of that delusion whether he wanted the seat or not. And Kendrick Lamar did not sign up for that assignment. Nobody handed him a permission slip to become the involuntary landlord of somebody else's mental spiral. Now, I want to be honest about the bigger dynamic here, because I have been watching this Drake and Kendrick Lamar situation and every one of its side quests for a long stretch of months now, and I am starting to see something that is not a coincidence anymore. It is a pattern. Not one incident. Not two. A shape. A repeating shape. Certain kinds of stunts keep coming out of one specific corner of the fandom, and the temperature on those stunts keeps ticking up week after week. When you zoom back and look at the mosaic of the last half year of content, you see something ugly forming underneath all the engagement farming. It is less, we love our artist, and more, we need our artist to see us, and we will do anything to catch his eye. And that is the whole ball game right there, because once your motivation is being seen instead of celebrating, you will cross any line the culture happens to lay in front of you. Let me read you a handful of community reactions to this doorstep clip, and I want you to notice something as I run through them. The response was not split. It was not a coin flip. It was not defense versus condemnation. Every single viewer, regardless of which side of the Drake and Kendrick Lamar aisle they usually sit on, landed in the same place, and that place is, this is indefensible. One viewer wrote that this is what happens when your favorite artist attracts a chronically online, unemployed teenage fan base. Another one wrote that these are supposed to be the shooters Drake keeps rapping about in his songs, and yet here they are cosplaying delivery drivers on a stranger's intercom. Another wrote the classic 4 words, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Another one wrote that if Kendrick Lamar supporters had pulled a stunt half as reckless as this, the entire timeline would have formed a lynch mob within the hour, but when the energy runs from the other direction, the room goes quiet. Another wrote, imagine catching a police report for Drake of all people. Another wrote that the same fanbase that spends every waking hour calling other people corny is out here pulling stunts of maximum corny. Another wrote what I thought was the sharpest diagnosis of the whole thing. This is what parasocial delusion looks like the moment it graduates from a comment section to a camera. Unanimity like that is rare in a culture war this heated. Unanimity is the tell. When neutrals, when opposite side loyalists, and when even the casuals who never engage with the beef all arrive at the same verdict inside the same hour, that is when you know a line has been crossed that should not have been crossed. There is no counter-narrative being drafted. There is no organized defense. Even the people who do not care about Kendrick Lamar or Drake either way are looking at this and saying, no, this is too far. And when the neutral crowd, the crowd that never even purchased a Kendrick Lamar record, the crowd that never streamed a Drake project all the way through, arrives at the same verdict as the loyalists, that is the culture speaking with one voice. That is the culture drawing a line in permanent ink. Alright, now let me set up the second clip, because this is where the pattern stops being an anecdote and starts being a diagnosis. Rewind your memory a couple of years, maybe closer to 3 depending on how you count the timeline. Some of you already know exactly which night I am about to reference. There was an incident outside Drake's own compound in Toronto. A security guard was shot. It was a serious, genuinely frightening night that made the entire culture take a breath and re-examine how far this thing had traveled. And to this day, there is no publicly verified, court-adjudicated, on-the-record answer about who was ultimately responsible or exactly why it happened. But the aftermath cast a long shadow over every conversation that followed. At the time, the immediate finger-pointing landed on Kendrick Lamar's side of the fence. There was speculation. There was blame. There was heat directed at anyone perceived to be even loosely aligned with Kendrick Lamar in that particular city. Whether that blame was fair or unfair is not the question I am here to relitigate tonight. The point I want you to hold in your head is that the direction of the blame was set. It was carved into the culture's memory. It became the default reading. And now, watching the current wave of stunts, I cannot stop noticing that the direction of the aggression has fully reversed since then, and the coverage has absolutely not caught up. The doorstep visits, the caravan trespasses, the sidewalk confrontations over song choices, the public physical assaults over portable speakers, the on-camera government name it is real-world aggression delivered in broad daylight to a total stranger on a busy public sidewalk, and the sole trigger for that aggression is that a Kendrick Lamar record was playing out loud from a portable speaker within earshot of the wrong people. Let me paint the scene clean. Toronto. Big crowd. Public sidewalk. Ordinary evening. A citizen is walking with a portable speaker, playing music at a normal volume. That is the entirety of the alleged offense. A person is playing music on their own personal device on a public sidewalk during an ordinary evening walk. A group of individuals rolls up on this person and starts shouting. They demand the music be shut off right now. They pile on threats. They invoke territorial ownership of the block, the city, the country if you let them keep going. Do not play Kendrick Lamar in this city. Do not play Kendrick Lamar around here. Do not play Kendrick Lamar in these streets. Do not play Kendrick Lamar within earshot. Then they escalate. They snatch the speaker out of the citizen's hands. They rip it clear across the sidewalk. And when the citizen bends down to retrieve his own property, they attack him. Multiple attackers. One target. Broad daylight. Over a song. I need you to sit with the absurdity of that before we go a single sentence further. We are now at a point in the cultural cycle where a private citizen cannot play a Kendrick Lamar song on his own personal speaker during his own personal evening walk without being physically assaulted by a group of strangers who took his personal audio choices as some kind of personal disrespect. That is not a beef. That is not a feud. That is not a rap battle. That is a public safety issue. That is a slow-motion escalation that began as clever bars in a recording booth and has now landed on somebody's ribs on a Toronto sidewalk. And the reason it landed there, in my honest assessment, is that for months on end, certain influencers, certain streamers, certain podcast hosts, and certain corners of the culture have been signaling through jokes, through territorial claims, through nickname warfare, and through repeated framing that this brand of aggression is acceptable. That it is part of the show, that it is a fun extension of the rap beef, that it is simply the cost of enjoying music in a hot moment. And I have to name it, because if I do not name it on this platform, I am complicit in it. This is not part of the game. This was never part of the game. A rap beef between two artists at the altitude of Drake and Kendrick Lamar is a spectator sport. It is not a draft notice. It is not a call to arms. It is not permission to hunt down civilians who happen to pick the wrong song on a Saturday evening. And any personality, any streamer, any commentator, any podcaster who has been quietly laundering that energy into the mainstream for clicks needs to sit down and take a long look at exactly what they have been platforming, because the receipts are on the table and the pattern is undeniable. Somewhere along the way, the fun stopped being fun, the joke stopped being a joke, the bit stopped being a bit, and we are all standing inside the consequences right now. Let me read some of the reactions to the Toronto clip, because just like the doorstep footage, the response was completely one-sided. One viewer wrote that the same city that had a full stadium chanting Kendrick Lamar's records back at Drake last year is now the same city where you can get jumped on the sidewalk for playing those exact records out loud, and they asked the room to make that make sense. Another one wrote that the aggressor sounded like a cornball rehearsing a tough guy audition tape on the easiest target he could find. Another wrote that Drake caught an entire stadium of his own hometown singing, "Not Like Us," back at him last summer, and this sidewalk assault is the sequel nobody asked for. Another one pointed out that the aggressor did not even sound convinced by his own voice, that he sounded like he was reading cue cards handed to him by somebody off-screen. Another one wrote that the same fanbase that runs around calling other people goofy is pulling stunts of maximum goofy on public video. Another wrote what I want to underline in permanent marker. This is not fandom. This is a personality disorder wearing a jersey. Another wrote, imagine assaulting a stranger over an artist who does not know you exist and who would tell you to stop if he ever found out. And another one wrote the line I keep coming back to. Neither Kendrick Lamar nor Drake sent these people, and this is just cowards using a rap beef as cover for being aggressive in public. Once again, unanimous. Nobody drafting a defense. Nobody spinning it. Every commenter, regardless of loyalty, arrived at the same conclusion inside the same window. This is out of pocket. This is beyond corny. This is dangerous, and somebody is going to catch a serious injury or worse if this current velocity holds. Let me be crystal clean about where I sit personally, because I know the comment section will try to twist it. I do not co-sign violence. I do not co-sign confrontations over music. I do not want to see anyone catch hands over a song, and I do not want to see anyone attacked for playing a Kendrick Lamar record, a Drake record, a J. Cole record, or a Whitney Houston record. That is my line, and I will repeat it as many times as necessary. But I am also not naive. I have lived in the real world long enough to know that when you keep pushing an escalation ladder in one direction, week after week, eventually the person at the top of that ladder pushes back, and when they push back, the return is almost never proportional to the trigger. That is the tragedy of the pattern I am describing tonight. The first few incidents look silly. The middle incidents look concerning. And the final incident, the one that breaks out of the culture blogs and lands on the national news, is the one that none of us are ready for, and by the time it arrives, none of the earlier stunts can be walked back. That is why I keep saying you are dancing on live wires around this situation. And by this situation, I do not necessarily mean Kendrick Lamar specifically. I mean any random citizen whose private evening you decide to disrupt for a viral clip. You do not know that person. You do not know their history. You do not know their week. You do not know their permit, their partner, or their pre-existing reason to be on edge. You do not know. And when you gamble on that ignorance for a phone recording, the odds do not favor you. Zoom back to Kendrick Lamar for a second, because the framing on him in these stunts has been off from the opening frame. Kendrick Lamar is not a rookie. Kendrick Lamar is not a mid-tier act. Kendrick Lamar is not a niche curiosity. Kendrick Lamar is a Pulitzer Prize-winning, Super Bowl halftime headlining, generation-defining figure whose catalog is currently studied at multiple universities. When you volunteer yourself onto Kendrick Lamar's alleged property as a bit, as a stunt, as a piece of engagement bait, you have signed yourself up for a consequence pool that a streamer with a couple thousand subscribers cannot afford to pay from. Kendrick Lamar has legal counsel. Kendrick Lamar has private security. Kendrick Lamar has a label footprint that can move faster than any local court docket. Kendrick Lamar has a documented history of not entertaining foolishness in his personal space. The risk-reward calculus on this stunt is upside down before the car doors even close. Here is the part that gets under my skin the longer I sit with it. These individuals believe they are being bold. They believe they are being clever. They believe they are pulling off the content coup of the season. But bold is not the right word for what they are actually doing. Bold is confronting somebody your own size, on equal footing, in a fair setting, in the daylight, with your name attached. Bold is putting your convictions on the record when there is a real cost involved. What these streamers are doing is the opposite of bold. They're farming attention by weaponizing a stranger's peace, hiding inside the numerical safety of a group, and bragging about it once they have retreated to a safe distance. That is not bravery. That is a costume. That is a role they read about online and decided to try on for an evening. And costumes do not stop bullets. Costumes do not stop lawsuits. Costumes do not stop consequences. Costumes come off in the morning, and the human being underneath still has to walk into work, still has to face a judge, still has to answer to a family member who watched the clip and cannot look them in the eye at the dinner table anymore. So, what actually happens next in this saga? Because that is the real question, and none of the surrounding coverage is asking it plainly. The pattern is escalating. The stunts are getting bolder. The public confrontations are getting more physical. The doorstep visits are getting closer to the actual door. The sidewalk confrontations are getting closer to actual assault charges. And nobody with a real platform is pumping the brakes. The influencers who reposted the doorstep clip laughed at it and rolled on to the next topic. The streamers who covered the Toronto sidewalk footage clipped it into a highlight reel and monetized it. The comment sections are full of outrage, yes, but outrage does not stop the next clip from being filmed. Outrage does not stop the next escalation from being greenlit in a group chat at 2 in the morning. Now let me be fair for a beat, because I do not want anyone twisting this into something it is not. Kendrick Lamar supporters are not perfect either. Every fandom carries an obsessive corner. Every fandom carries a chronically online contingent. Every fandom carries a few genuinely unhinged extremists. Kendrick Lamar supporters have them. Drake supporters have them. Nicki Minaj supporters have them. J. Cole supporters have them. Taylor Swift supporters have them. Every artist attracts a certain species of obsessive attachment, and I have been on record about that dynamic for years. But what I am watching right now, from this one specific corner of the culture, has a distinct flavor. It has a signature texture. It has a specific move set that separates it from ordinary fandom passion. And Kendrick Lamar is the recurring target, which is the reason his name has to keep sitting inside every honest breakdown of what is happening. So, what actually breaks the cycle? That is the question I keep returning to when the camera stops rolling. I will tell you what I believe breaks it. I believe the cycle only breaks when somebody higher up the food chain steps to a microphone and says, enough. I believe the cycle breaks when an artist with real leverage in this culture goes on camera, on their own platform, and says out loud, leave my supporters out of this, do not roll up on Kendrick Lamar's property, do not jump strangers on my behalf, do not treat any of this music as a weapon. That is the one voice left that can lower the temperature. Because these streamers are not listening to me. They are not listening to the comment section. They are not listening to their families. But they might listen to the artists they claim to be defending on the clips they keep filming. That is the last lever the culture has not yet pulled. Even that lever is not a guarantee though. Because when artists finally do speak up, when they publicly distance themselves from the worst behavior of their fanbase, the parasocial contingent does not always accept the message. Sometimes the contingent doubles down. Sometimes they interpret the disavowal as evidence that the artist is being silenced by the industry. Sometimes they invent a version of the story where the artist is under duress and being forced to publicly renounce them against his will. That is how deep the delusion runs at this stage of the cycle. That is how far the psychology has drifted from anything resembling reality. Let me bring this back to the practical for a second, because there are actual takeaways sitting inside these two clips for every single one of us who consumes and reshares this culture with every click. Takeaway 1. Do not roll up on anybody's residence. Not for a joke. Not for a bit. Not for a clip. Not for a check. Not for clout. Not for the algorithm. Not for Kendrick Lamar. Not for Drake. Not for anybody. If your content pipeline requires you to trespass on a stranger's driveway to survive another week, your content pipeline is fundamentally broken and you need to build a new one. There are 1,000 ways to make engaging content that do not involve knocking on doors you were not invited through. Takeaway 2. Do not touch a stranger over a song. Not in Toronto. Not in Atlanta. Not in Houston. Not in New York. Not in London. Not on any block on any continent. A song is a song. A speaker is a speaker. If somebody's music annoys you in a public space, walk the other way, put your own headphones in, cross the street. That is how functional adults handle audio discomfort in a shared environment. You do not get to regulate what a stranger listens to on his own device on a public sidewalk. That is not your lane. That is not your jurisdiction. And the moment your hands go on another person over a song choice, you have crossed from fandom into a courtroom. Takeaway 3. If you're an influencer, a streamer, a podcaster, or a commentator with a platform, think twice before you laugh at these clips on your channel. Think twice before you boost them. Think twice before you convert somebody else's trespass into your own thumbnail. Because every share, every laugh, Every cosine is a small deposit into the escalation ladder, and the escalation ladder is not a metaphor. It is a real staircase with real steps, and every step gets steeper, and every step gets more expensive, and every step brings the culture closer to an incident that none of us will be able to unsee. I want to acknowledge something head-on before I close this out, because I already know the counterargument that is going to land in the comments. I know some of you are going to say I am carrying water for Kendrick Lamar. I know some of you are going to say I would have a different tone if the incidents ran the other direction. I want to answer that on the record right now so nobody can misquote me later. If this exact same footage, the doorstep caravan and the sidewalk assault over a speaker, had come from Kendrick Lamar's supporters aimed at Drake's supporters, I would be sitting in this same chair, in this same lighting, saying the exact same words. I would be calling it corny. I would be calling it dangerous. I would be pointing at the same escalating pattern. I would be reading the same unanimous comment section. Because the pattern is the problem, not the jersey, not the flag, not the artist, and not the city. The pattern itself. And that is really the whole point of the video. Because in the end, none of this is actually about Kendrick Lamar. None of this is actually about Drake. None of this is actually about hip-hop as a genre. This is about a wider phenomenon, in which obsessive online communities lose their grip on the shape of reality, forget the boundary between screen and street, and start behaving as if the internet is an actual battlefield with actual enemies and actual life or death stakes. And when that online battlefield finally spills into the physical world, and it always spills eventually, the people who absorb the impact are almost never the artists themselves. The artists are on private jets. The artists have security. The artists have lawyers. The people who absorb the impact are regular civilians. Somebody's cousin. Somebody's brother. Somebody's son. Somebody's neighbor. Somebody's coworker. Somebody's roommate. The bystander who happened to press play on the wrong song on the wrong sidewalk on the wrong evening. That is the actual cost of the pattern. Not the streamers filming it. Not the commentators laughing at it. Not Kendrick Lamar in a recording booth. Not Drake in a private studio. The bystander. And once that bystander ends up on a hospital gurney, the entire culture will pretend it did not see this coming, when the truth is every honest observer has been watching the arrow point this way for months. So take this breakdown for what it is. Take it as a warning. Take it as a mirror. Take it as an invitation to sit with the pattern I have laid out and figure out where you stand inside of it personally. Are you laughing when these clips hit your timeline? Are you forwarding them into your group chat? Are you rooting for one side to embarrass the other on public video? Or are you one of the ones ready to say, out loud, enough, this is not the culture I signed up for? Because the answer to that internal question is going to shape the next 12 months of this feud more than any diss track Drake or Kendrick Lamar could possibly release. And if the trend line I have described tonight holds its current speed, the next 12 months are going to feature at least one incident that none of us are prepared for. None of us. Screenshot the video. Come back to it in a year. I will still be here. All right, family. I have laid the pattern out for the record. Now I want to hear from you in the comments, because this conversation does not get solved by one person talking into one camera. Drop a comment down below and tell me, are you seeing what I am seeing? Do you agree that a specific corner of the fandom has crossed a line that will not be walked back? Or do you think I am off base and this is standard internet noise that dissolves by next weekend? I read every comment. I respond to as many as I can. Let us have this conversation together, in public, until the culture actually shifts. One last thing before I close the tab for the night. If you made it this far into the video, we vibe. That means we clicked. That means you rock with the way I break these situations down piece by piece. So the small ask on my side is this. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and turn notifications on so you do not miss the next drop. I have an entire slate coming this week, including a full breakdown of the industry mechanics that made this Drake and Kendrick Lamar feud commercially possible in the first place, plus a deep dive into the parasocial economy that keeps producing footage like the two clips we just picked apart. You are going to want to be inside the room for both. That is the read. That is the story. That is the pattern in full color, and it is a pattern every single one of us has a role in either feeding or starving. Stay sharp out there. Do not knock on strange doors. Do not touch strangers over songs. And do not, under any circumstances, let a rap beef between two grown millionaires turn you into a headline. I will see you on the next one.